of course, I love the fact that everybody's got all these wide-ranging thoughts that are inspired by the reading of Aristotle, and I don't want to inhibit anybody from going there. But right, when there's a pause in the conversation, I'll go back to the text. Anyway, so welcome everybody. I hope everybody enjoyed your break. We're going to trudge through 8 weeks of Aristotle and see how far we get. Let me see. I've got a big text in front of me, which is fine. Bo, I might have a couple screen shares. So if you can enable me, I don't need to do it right now, but just so it's enabled, so I can do it when I need it.
You can share now. Go ahead.
Thank you. All right. So anyway, welcome everybody. It's great to see all the old faces. It's good to see some new ones. And
my favorite new face is animals. Just saying.
Thank you.
Your puns are always way beyond me.
Animal is the Muppet down in the bottom there.
Oh, right. Rashid, hey, I've been in contact with Rashid, so nice to see your your visage.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Okay, I was expecting a lot more people, but I'm thinking we're just going to run ahead. People can come and go as they please. Anyway, so I don't want to spend too much in the way of an introduction. The idea of this course is to read a couple of texts of Aristotle with the intent of getting to an adequate understanding of how the term soul and the term intellect, or which has variously come down to us as spirit and as reason. So the goal is to understand the context and the necessity for introducing these logical structures, which get the name soul and spirit in De Anima, and thereby have a very rich, contradictory, and elusive history through Western thought. And we want to be in a position to follow that out, to actually track it through history to see how these concepts get renamed, rethought, sometimes truncated, sometimes obliterated, sometimes misunderstood. It's got a very rich history in Western thought, and I want us all to be better interpreters of that history. So we start with the beginning, which is Plato and Aristotle, but I think we get to it quicker just by heading straight into Aristotle, and then every once in a while taking a look back to Plato. All right. Let's see. Before I do start, I want to give a shout out to Clark for being such a great sport in this massive discussion that took place on the meetup website for the meetup website, the Portland meetup website for this group. Clark is brave enough to articulate reasoned resistance to some of what he's encountering in Aristotle. And that is a very good thing to have in a group, as long as that resistance is self-critical and not just dogmatically asserting some other system. And Clark's been terrific at that. And so I just want to applaud his willingness to buck the consensus and thereby provoke what I think was a very illuminating discussion. So Clark, I'm going to give you the floor just for a second in case you want to respond to that, but gratitude, thanks.
Thanks, Michael. I'm driving and I don't know if you can hear me, but I
can.
My signal's a little sketchy, but I took in what you said. I drank it deeply, much appreciation. I definitely want to learn. So, and yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, wonderful. That's commitment. He's listening to it. It's like a podcast in his car. That's awesome. All right, so so this seminar was originally designed to go to the soul and to show the way in which soul and spirit, or life and intellect, these are synonyms, um, are conceptualized by Plato and Aristotle as the most intimate unity of thought and being. And so one of the major perspectives on this is, how do the Greeks think this Parmenidean unity of thought and being, and what even allows them to assert what seems to be such an absurd thing to say. And so the original idea was that we were going to get there, but then I decided we've actually, once we hit the categories, we were already there, and so we needed to start thematizing it. And so that's why I had everybody think about, what, on the basis of the categories, what is it that we know about anything, if anything is to be something, okay? And so everybody did a very good job in trying to unpack that. And what I asked you to consider was that on the basis of the categories, Aristotle shows that there is no such thing as a statement or a thought that can be true or false, that doesn't have a certain structure. And that structure we can call subject predicate structure. We've been calling it predication as a technical term, and we've been spelling it out in the way the Greeks spelled it out, to say something about something. So there is no such thing as something that we could possibly experience that would not be involved in the web of dependence relations that are implied by something being said about something. And we cashed out those very general, very vague dependence relations. I'm using a very boring term so as to not get too speculative and theological yet, right? But just dependence relations, and we spelled those out as substance, accidents, and particular and universal. And so the categories gave us, so to speak, the thought of anything at all the thought of anything at all entails that when we think about anything, it's going to be within this fourfold framework of dependencies, right? Substance and accident. Some things are going to belong to other things. Some things are going to have other things belong to them. Bam. Okay. And the kinds of things that belong to one another, we articulated as either universals or particulars. And the way in which they belong together, we articulated as substance and accidents. So substance, accident, universal, particular, that is the thought of anything at all. And we want to stay inside this thought when we read further into Aristotle. We don't want to go outside it. We don't want to start thinking about things that couldn't be anything at all, because then we're thinking about nothing. We're just giving names to figments of our imaginations, right? And so because predication has the structure that it does, that which is a possible object of knowledge is going to reflect that structure. And we're not going to be able to say we know anything, or that we see anything, or that we know that there's this thing in the world that is completely outside of the kind of dependence relations that I just mentioned. Now we've gone into the metaphysics, and we're beginning to spell out those dependence relations. We're starting to flesh them out a little tiny bit with the notion of the four causes. Right, we're getting a little bit more insight into, a little bit more detail, a little more content into these very general dependence relations that anything must be entwined in order to be something. Okay, so in thinking these dependence relations, we are actually thinking what anything must be in order to be anything at all, and that is contained in our thought of it. And so already we are thinking in our thought the unity of thought and being. Right. That was kind of as far as we got in the first 8 weeks.
Mental states are also physical states. Substance to all is denied.
So thanks. Okay. So now we're on book Little Alpha, and let's read some of it now, just as a little formal reminder. Aristotle in the first book looked at his predecessors and tried to look to see if in their comprehension of all that is, in the comprehension of being, which they called nature, was there any cause that wasn't one of Aristotle's four causes? And he showed that that no one has ever thought a cause that, and therefore no one has ever come up with a kind of explanation that isn't one of Aristotle's four causes. And so what we have is Aristotle looking back to the past and ascertaining that nobody has talked about anything that isn't encapsulated in these four causes, and so we're not missing anything. Now, this book, Little Alpha, is looking on the other side. He's saying, okay, well, what if there's not just four, but what if there's infinite causes? Right? Some people say there's infinite causes, right? And this is his rebuttal of that idea, that there could be infinite causes. The causes can go upwards in higher and higher forms infinitely. They can go backwards into earlier and earlier motions, that they can go downwards into infinite numbers of species and subspecies. Right. So he wants to rule out for all four of the causes, he wants to rule out the possibility that any of them could be infinite, and that therefore, right, that's the main point, in knowing the cause, we're not actually knowing the thing. We saw in the posterior analytics that knowing anything is knowing the cause, knowing its cause, and that knowing the cause is the middle term. Right. Okay. So now, just a sec. Just want to throw up one little diagram here. Okay. Sorry, so share screen. Right, okay, so my diagrams are always incredibly unsophisticated, but we all know this syllogism, right? All human beings are mortal. Socrates is a human being, therefore Socrates is mortal. And what's important is that the middle term that links mortality and Socrates has disappeared in the conclusion. You know, the French like to talk about the vanishing mediator. Well, this is what they're talking about right there. The connection between things is not evident in the conclusions. Now, that also means this, you know, anything we want to explain, you know, why is the airplane falling from the sky? That, which we want to explain, is always our conclusion. And what's important is that what explains it is never given in any experience. Right? The middle term always vanishes. You can't see causes. You can't touch them. You can't taste them. They're not part of the world of appearance. The mediator, the cause, the ground of knowledge always disappears. So every syllogism is going to exhibit precisely this mysterious, interesting point that you never see what connects anything. You only see things in some kind of regular behaviors or regular successions, but you never see the connection. So the connection is the middle term, and the middle term always drops out in the conclusion, and the conclusion is that which we're trying to understand. How is it that Socrates is mortal? And then we ascend to our premises. In the premises, we discover the middle term, and the middle term is what always disappears in our conclusion. All right. So stop sharing that. Okay, so, oh, I see, sorry, Tim, I just saw your hand. I don't know how long it's been up. Sorry, go ahead. Did Tim just disappear? Oh, no.
He's muted. He needs
You're
to mute
muted.
himself.
You're muted, Tim.
Sorry. So I don't see mortal in that syllogism, but Socrates is mortal. And then I do see human beings, but so I don't really see the connection between that syllogism and the cause of an airplane falling from the sky. I'm just not following where the interplay is between a syllogism like that and a cause in the physical world.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No. Very fair question. I did handle that deal with that very quickly. But the basic idea is that anything you want to explain is going to be the conclusion of your explanation, and your explanation is going to provide the premises from which you derive the conclusion and say, well, the airplane had to fall because of blah, 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 air pressure or something like that, right? And so the loss of air pressure in the cabin or whatever is something that we see, but we don't see it, or we can feel it, but we don't see it as cause. We have to think it as cause. And my very simple point is that Aristotle defines the cause as the middle term. The middle term is always invisible. It is always invisible in the conclusion. And so we will never find something that is a cause without our thinking it as cause and understanding the relation.
Okay, so we provide the cause. We sort of are the middle term. Our explanation is the middle term, and our explanation is the cause. Is that kind of the idea?
I don't want to make it, that sounds a little bit too nominalistic, but I understand how one might take that away, right? We want real causes, but on the other hand, just thinking something as a cause and just say, well, that's a cause, right? When the sparrow flew before the plane, right, that's the cause. But that's not going to have any explanatory value. And so, so what I want to say is there's this weird thing that we need to wrap our arms around, right? That the causes are real, but they're only available in thought. And they're not available in any perception whatsoever.
Well, that means that must mean then that there's some kind of criteria that we
Yes.
have to apply, whether
Exactly.
whether the cause is real or not.
Right.
That what is that external to our thought, or is that internal to our thought?
Definitely internal. Any standard is going to be a way of understanding things. Tom?
Right. I'm just responding to Tim's question and invite Tim to recall the previous reading that we had 4 weeks ago in the Posterior Analytics book 2. Book 2 and chapter 2, and actually it's the third paragraph there. From the Hugh Trinidad translation which Michael provided for everybody. It does say that it follows then that in all these questions, we are asking either, is there a middle term, or what is the middle term, because the middle term is the cause. And that is what we are trying to find out in every case.
Right.
And so that's just what we covered 4 weeks ago. Just want to invite you to review that part.
Yeah, and thank you. And the only thing I wanted to add is the only thing I wanted to add is that the middle term, what we always are seeking, is never given in any perception. Okay, that's the point. We're seeking something, but it's never given in any perception. So it's not like we're making it up and just naming something, but it's also not something that will ever that we could ever possibly encounter as perceptive beings with perception. Okay. So I don't want to go beyond that. I just want to kind of open up this mystery a little bit, because what we don't want to do is we don't want to be anachronistic and just think that what Aristotle is doing is kind of like what Einstein and Newton are doing. He's not. And so we want to avoid those kind of associations. All right, so enough prelude. Let's look at Little Book Alpha. And I recommend that we just do the hard stuff, or the trickier stuff first, so that we get there, which is Alpha 2. And we're going to let's just go straight into the arguments and see what we can get out of them that are intended to exclude the possibility of an unlimited number of causes. All right. So could I get somebody to read? Anybody who would be willing to read? Well, let's start with the first two paragraphs, and the first one kind of gives a general introduction, and the second one gives us one of the meatier arguments. So we'll untangle those knots. Do I got a reader?
I can read.
Beautiful. Thanks, Mike.
But that there is some starting point, that is, that the causes of beings are neither one, an unlimited series, nor two, unlimited in kind, eidos, is clear. 1, for neither is it possible for one thing to come from another as matter without limit. For example, flesh from earth, earth from air, air from fire, and so on without stopping. Nor is it possible for the starting point from which the movement comes to be such, for example, for a human to be moved by air, air by sun, sun by strife, and so on without limit. Similarly, the for the sake of which cannot go on without limit either. For example, walking for the sake of health, this for the sake of happiness, and happiness for the sake of something else. And so one thing always being for the sake of another. And in the case of the essence, it is the same. For of meals in a series, since there is a last one and a prior one, the prior one must be the cause of the things that come after it. For if we had to say which of the three was the cause, we would say the first. For it is certainly not the last, since the final one causes nothing. But then it is not the medial one either, for it is the cause of only one thing. And it makes no difference whether there is one medial thing or more than one, nor whether they are unlimited or limited in number. But of series that are unlimited in this way, and of what is unlimited generally, all the parts are alike medial things down to now. All the parts are alike medial things down to now, so that if indeed there is no first one, there is no cause at all.
Thank you. All right. So I think the general introduction speaks for itself. It's, but if there's any particular questions anybody has about the first paragraph, let's look at those.
Yeah, I've raised my hand, but sorry, I accidentally unclicked it.
Oh, okay.
You're open to a question?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, this reminds me of Kant's antinomies.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of wondering if Aristotle had already solved that problem, why did Kant have to solve it? It seems like Aristotle is just saying, oh, it doesn't make sense that there's an infinite series, so there must have been a first one. But that itself
Yeah.
is a problem, right? A first cause is itself a problem, and that's why Kant tried to solve both.
Right.
So I'm just not very confident in Aristotle's assumption here.
Okay. Well, I think that's fair enough. But let's just try to start getting at why he thinks this. What the argument is and what's convincing about it. So and then because of your experience with Kant, you can ascertain whether Kant dealt with the dimension that Aristotle is focusing on or not. Okay, so who wants to take
more
a
hands up, Michael.
Pardon me? Sorry, I can't see hands.
So we have Amjo, Peter, and Sandy. Go ahead, Amjo.
Well, I just have a quick comment. It seems like in the first and the second paragraph, it seems to me it makes a little bit of sense if you understand it in terms of his four causes. He's just reviewing it subtly in that way.
Okay, excellent. No, you're totally right.
I think he fixes on efficient one. That's the one that I think he seems to be focusing on more so. But he is actually talking about all his four causes right there, in the first and second paragraph. Mostly in the first paragraph, all the four. So it's just kind of a nice review.
Beautiful.
Very nice review.
No, I appreciate that. I think that's exactly right. And if we remember from the first book, most of his predecessors had matter and efficient causes, but most of them didn't talk about forms and final causes. So he's going to be most interested in the material and the efficient cause in terms of whether they can be infinite or not. I'm not sure who's next.
Peter.
Sandy, Peter?
Let's go, Peter.
Yeah, I'll just point out, Michael, that if you open the participants window, you will see people with their hands raised in the correct order.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'll try my best to keep that open.
Anyway, the point I was going to make was, at least with respect to Tim's comment on Kant, at least Aristotle does recognize that if there is an infinite series, then there is neither a first nor a last, a beginning point nor an end point. And everything is of the same order. They're all middle points.
Right.
But they're not really explaining anything because they're not really bringing anything together. So at least he has that part. And I think that's maybe why he wants to have a first point and or an end point.
Okay. Sandy.
I just had a question about medial things.
Right.
I was just kind of confused by, maybe I need to go back and get it more clear to me about the four causes, but when he introduces this medial things, is that him talking about just this example he's given above, or is the medial things more of a bigger problem, I guess, that has to be dealt with? I'm just not really clear about, because he says medial things in a series, but he kind of also gives a series when he talks about causes. So I just wasn't, but then when he says medial things, he kind of seems to be talking about it like it's a specific kind. So I'm just not, I don't want to bog, the conversation down, but I just wondered if you could briefly maybe clarify for me, or if anybody else is confused about that.
I'm sure everybody's confused about it. So thank you very much for the question. No, it's an excellent question. And I'm going to open up the floor to somebody, to anybody who wants to first, who has a sense of why Aristotle here needs to speak about medial things. Go ahead, Tom. And then, first Tom and then Joel.
I think in terms of a chain of causation, I'm speaking directly to Sandy.
Yeah.
In a chain of causation, you can think of there's the first cause, and then there are a middle cause, and then the last one that happens. So it's like a chain reaction kind of thing. So there's a first, middle, last. And he's just saying that the middle could be an infinitely, almost infinite, but you can always say it's the middle. And then the last is the last thing that won't cause anything. And then the first is the one that causes all the domino, that does everything. So abstractly, he's just breaking the chain of causation into first, middle, last. That's it.
Awesome. Joel, if I'm saying your name wrong, please correct me so I'll get it right. You bet you're up next.
Amjol, yeah,
Amjol.
Amjol is fine, Michael. That's perfectly okay. I kind of took it. Now, it might be questionable here, but I took it as kind of more efficient cause. Kind of like a series. I tend to also think that he's making a nice kind of distinction. He's also including kind of Hume's. Just think of Hume when he thinks of these series. If you're familiar with Hume, causes in Hume. So, this sort of address he's going to look at. Most of us think of causes in terms of Humean causality, I think.
True. Thanks for that contribution. Greg, you're up.
Okay, I had to unmute. How is unlimited different from infinite? And in relation to Tom's explanation of Aristotle, I think the explanation is right. And so I think Aristotle is assuming something just by calling a cause mediate or medial. If it were an infinite series of medial causes, you would never get to the first one. So it would only be like medial in name. But I guess the shorter version is, what's the difference between unlimited and infinite? If there can't be an infinite series of causes, why can there be an unlimited series of medial causes?
Okay, so let's stick with okay, so we're going to get to unlimited soon because that's super important, but let's stick with this medial thing first, right? Because it's the fulcrum of his first argument, right? So if we think of a series of causes, right? Or let's say, I want to explain why the airplane is falling out of the sky. And then I come up with a cause for that, right? Air pressure. Well, what caused the air pressure to fall? Then I'm gonna come up with a cause for that. And then what caused that? I'm gonna come up with a cause with that. And Aristotle's asking, is it possible for this causal chain to go back to infinity, or to be infinite, to never end, right? Now, if we have that causal sequence, or that sequence of events in our minds, and we think of the last one as the plane dropping out of the sky, that's one term of the sequence, one end of it, right? That's what we're trying to explain. And then prior to that, every event or everything that we say is a cause, prior to that is a medial thing, right? Until we get to the first cause. And at that point, we would have two terms, the end and the beginning, and everything that happens in between. And everything that happens in between are middle things or medial things, okay? So I'm gonna turn this back to Sandy and just ask whether that helps a little bit with this idea of medial things.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about it in terms of what you were saying before about the hidden connection or whatever it was. And so I'm just confused. Like, either these medial things are barking up the wrong tree for us to focus on it. It seems to me they're just the connectors in kind of an unimportant way, or it seems to me they're the most important thing. They're the thing that ties it all together. So I'm just a little confused, because I'm just trying to think, like, if you have this, I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember what you said earlier with the Socrates is mortal thing, but you talked about this connection.
Right.
So
okay, so I'm going to spell that one out just to avoid any possible confusions. So Aristotle's four causes, right? Matter, form, cause of movement, and the final cause. Right? Those are the four causes. None of them are available in perception. Right? They're all middle terms. They're all middle terms. Okay, so we see one thing move, and then we see another thing move, and we see that they come into contact with one another, but we never see the cause. That's Hume's point, right? Right? If knowledge only comes from perception, then then there's no such thing as cause. There's no knowledge of cause. All we do is see things act in regular ways. Right? And there's a sense in which Aristotle agrees with him. He says, yeah, you never see a cause, you have to think it, but that doesn't mean that they're not real, because Aristotle is not saddled with the problem of limiting knowledge to knowledge of things that can be perceived. Okay, so those four causes, you can't see them, you can't taste them, you can't touch them, nothing. Okay, so they operate like the middle term. They connect, right? But you never see the connection. You have to think it. And so there's four different ways of thinking the connection, thinking that kind of dependency, right? Namely, the names of the four causes. So Aristotle now is saying, well, there's four causes. Maybe there's an infinite number of causes, and he needs to rule that out for knowledge to be possible. So even if there were an infinite number of causes, none of them would be available to perception. It's just that they wouldn't be. It would be more than these four different kinds of cause.
Is the issue the kinds of causes, or a chain of the same kind of cause going back infinitely?
Right, but that's the point. Like Amjad said about the first paragraph, he's saying each one of these causes, it's impossible for them to be an infinite series within each one of these causes.
In the medial one, he's assuming what's trying to be argued. He's saying there can't be an infinite chain of medial causes, because there must be a starting cause. And the person who thinks there can be an infinite series of causes, technically they are all medial, because you never get to the first one.
Right.
Oh, but you have to. But the other person is saying, oh, but you can't.
Right.
Okay.
No, but so his point is that there are no medial causes if they're not in between, right? If they're not in between a first and a last. And a further point is if there's a last, then the number of causes can't be infinite, because it has an end. There's a final term. And so it's a finite, so it's necessarily finite. But that's separate. That's not what he's saying right here. So the first idea seems to be, you are not thinking a causal series, but you're just thinking a series. If you think that they can all be medial things, that they're nothing but intermediates, right? You have failed to think the nature of cause by merely setting up an infinite series that has no beginning and therefore has never begun. Objections, comments?
Doesn't he I mean, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, because I'm not sure when the notion was introduced, but I thought that this only applied to essentially ordered series and not accidentally ordered series of causes. Like if you have a universe that has existed for an infinite period of time, which Aristotle certainly believed, you could have, something come along, cause something, and then go away. And then long after that happened, something else causes something else. Like, you could turn on the AC, walk away, and then only later does the cold air cool your coffee cup.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you could have, and those are accidentally ordered series of causes, whereas an essentially ordered series of causes might be, if you have a book on a bookshelf, the shelf is holding up the book, but what's holding up the shelf?
Mm-hmm.
And that would be more like the kind of causal series that cannot fail to have a first member.
Okay. I mean, I guess the first thing that occurs to me is that doesn't seem to be the distinction he's deploying in this paragraph, as cogent as it is, right? And so maybe this argument is incomplete, and we can we might come to that conclusion. But let's just milk what we can out of it, and to see how Aristotle is thinking the nature of cause, because that's one of the things that we're in the process of trying to grasp. Is not just assume that he has our conception of cause, and because if he had our conception of cause, he wouldn't have 4 causes. He'd have 2, or he'd have statistical analysis or something like that. So yeah, let's plume this a little bit more, and then see if your distinction has still some traction. Sandy?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, pose the question of, because you've given these there's been a lot of examples coming up about material things, which, I mean, it's not like he's not talking about that, but I wonder, is that really what he's talking about? Like, is he talking about a thing going from being hot to cold, or
right.
An object in motion crashing, or
Mm-hmm.
is, because later in the next paragraph, he starts talking about a child turning into a man, or a man coming out of
right.
a child, and that is not like these Newtonian physics kind of stuff, material sort of thing that examples that we've kind of been given.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes me wonder, like, how relevant some of these physics examples are to what he's talking about. I mean, maybe, I mean, I'm not trying to say
right.
It's not relevant, because he obviously does think it's relevant, because this is what gets us thinking about these things in the first place, I guess, is when we notice some kind of a change in something, or, but it seems to me that he's more concerned with these, like, the idea of the child coming, the man coming out of the child. That's, I mean, yeah, I guess you could say there's, I don't know, medical, like, physical things going on there, but that doesn't seem to be what he's particularly interested in when he talks about that. So I'm just wondering, where he's trying to lead us here,
right.
With this.
Right. I mean, let's look at I mean, he gives us a very simple example, right? And I guess, and I'd be interested in hearing Rashid's comment on this very simple example, right? He's explicating a concept of cause, and a concept of cause is always a concept of that which is explanatory of the thing that's caused by this cause, right? And so it makes no sense to import conception of cause into an Aristotelian framework that wouldn't itself be explanatory, but would merely defer the explanation, right, to some other thing, and then to some other thing, and then to some other thing. And then we never get an explanation, but we just get our same problem posed over and over and over again, in which point we're in a kind of an infinite regress. Or we are, that's the logical problem. If our explanation just poses the problem that we're trying to explain again, right, we haven't explained anything, our explanation is vacuous. So he writes, for if we had to say which of these three, I'll start at the beginning. For of medial things, since there is a last one and a prior one, the prior one must be the cause of the things that come after it. For if we had to say which of the three was the cause, we would say the first. Okay, so just that's almost a ridiculously simple and maybe inadequate example. But that's what he's resting his argument on. And he infers from this that if all causes are in between and there is no first, then they're not causes. Then we only have a series. And we have a series, then it's not explanatory. So that's how I'm reading this particular argument. So it's an argument about how to think about the nature of cause. Does anybody have a response or an objection or a thought experiment or anything to roll with this?
I think one of the important things is that in a series, the first cause it doesn't stay until the end. It drops out. And so you lose that relation of the first to the third, the fourth. It only has a relation to the second in a series.
Not necessarily. I think in some types, so insofar as the causal power of any medial causes is acquired from the preceding cause, if that's ordered over a period of time, then you're correct, I think, right? So this thing that caused, something a long time ago is not currently causing something to happen today. But there's some situations, I think, in which there's simultaneous causality here and now, where the power to have an effect, the power to be a cause, is derived right now from something else. So an example is like a bookshelf holding up a book. It derives its power to hold up a book from the wall it's attached to right now, not a long time ago. So you could reasonably say that the wall is holding up the book.
But that moves out of series, right? That's more than just a series.
It's hierarchical rather than
right. The hierarchical, I think, is the proper way to think of causality if we're going to get past the problem of the first disappearing.
Okay, I got some hands, but Sandy had her hand up first and put it down. So I'm just going to give you an opportunity. You want to jump in, or do you want to wait until this specific discussion is over?
I think that was an accident. I was supposed to be giving a thumbs up to something you said, but now I forgot what it was. But
okay, so I got Philip next.
So there we are.
Yep.
And I have kind of two observations. One, in like a lot of engineering work, you talk about root cause analysis, but it's, as a matter of fact, it's always medial. And the rule of thumb is go down 3 to 7, right? So that's why the rule of thumb is 5. You go to 5 root causes, but it's always understood to be medial. So in a certain sense, it's not a cause at all, but it's like good enough. But that's the world of practical knowledge. That's not what we're concerned with here.
Yes.
And I'm also thinking about the terror, choose one, but particularly the terror in the French Revolution. So if you believe that there are no causes in this sense, that there's just this sense of medial relationships, then if you want to change society, the terror is your only answer. You just exterminate because you can't cause any change.
Right.
Like the bourgeois cannot be changed because it's this endless set of medial causes. So it's logical to say you exterminate.
Very logical. Awesome. Thanks. I'm Joel, and then Peter, and then Richard had his head on, but I'm Joel first.
Oh yeah, I wanted to. I think what Philip said is very interesting. Just the common sense notion of causality. Maybe, when you're thinking more theoretically, we should think of the first one. But my feeling is that really, in this series, let's say in a series of, not like Rashid is thinking like causal powers, like shelves holding up books, not like that. That's a little bit complex. But let's just, Humean cause. Let's just say series. A pool player pool player is, I take the player to be the he's the first one, right? Uses the stick, hits the ball, the white ball hits some other ball, right? And that, now, common sense seems to me to suggest that what out of those series, Aristotle thinks it's the player. Look to the player in this analogy, this thought experiment.
Right.
But my intuition, a little bit different. No, it's not that. It's the contact between the last ball and the second one. That contact, see, that's the real cause. Why? Because it's possible that that player, he hits the ball and he misses. But it's always a case that when there's contact, the ball will move. So that's why the player is not that important. It's always the contact. That's the necessary thing, not the player, because the player could miss.
Yes, that's it. That's interesting. Peter, do you want to follow up on something here?
Yeah. So again, I kind of disagree with, or I either did not understand Tyler's point or I disagree with it. As far as the middle terms go, the problem is, like, if you're wondering if Greeks are mortal, you just don't know if they're mortal or not. You need an explanation that ties the term Greek with the term mortal. And so you're looking for a middle term that will explain if and why Greeks are mortal. And it's always a bit of inspiration to come up with a middle term. Even Aristotle admits that in posterior analytics. The middle term in this case, in the standard classical syllogism, is human. Assuming you know that all humans are mortal and all Greeks are humans, human becomes the middle term. It's a thing that appears both in the major and minor premise that connects the two terms that are in the conclusion.
Right.
It's that chain of reasoning that connects them. And Aristotle does put some more conditions on what it takes to be a full explanation. It has to be a simple one and a whole bunch of other stuff. But regardless, that's the point. So that the first thing in the chain doesn't really disappear, like Tyler was suggesting. What happens is that all the middle terms, and in some sense, can be collapsed to one, because we're ultimately trying to associate the first and the last terms together. And so and it doesn't matter how many middle terms you have to go through. You're ultimately trying to get to the first and the last term. Those are the important ones, and the middle ones kind of are all instrumental in some sense.
Right. Tyler, you want to follow up on that, or?
Yeah, I think so. Peter's talking about the hierarchical relations rather than the temporal series one.
Serial relations, not hierarchical.
So in what way is the syllogism a serial relation? I guess I don't understand.
A causes B, causes C, causes D, causes E, causes F.
But that's not the structure of the syllogism.
If A, then B. If B, then C. If C, then D. If D, then...
But that's not a proper...
Logical. Those are logical. They're not in a... They are in a series, in a logical series of perhaps argumentation or explanation, but they're all happening at once.
It doesn't account for how there's a unity of all the different parts of the series. So if we think of it as an event, right? Event A causes event B, but then event A disappears, and that's the problem. As Aristotle says, we need the first cause not to disappear.
Well, yeah, I guess we're equivocating then on what cause means. It's not just a temporal, efficient cause.
Yeah, I think that in trying to understand, if I understand Amjal's question, to take the Humean view of what's going on with the billiard ball example, that is an event-to-event type of conception of causation. But in the Aristotelian view, my take is that it is not about events. It is about whatever things or group of things in the way that they are, what they are, and the matter, the form, the who is or what is the starting of that change process? To what end is it approaching? Those are the questions about causes. And it is not about what you perceive in a kind of a snapshot event, as in a film strip with the multiple events from one event to the next, as in one film strip to the film in that strip to the next. And then that's why there's no connection between one film to the next film picture. But the causation here is about the things that are either changing from a man, from a boy to a man, or from whether water transform into air. So the different changes that Aristotle mentioned earlier to address Sandy's point, it is either gradual change or sudden change that he was trying to bring out, but from one thing to another. So it's the things, the material and the form and everything together that bring out a change or a cause.
Right. Right. So I think that's very helpful. It does go way beyond the text, but sometimes you have to go beyond the text in order to make sense of it. And eventually we'll understand this when we get in the middle of the book. But I think that the operative thought informing this is that every change from one thing to another is a shift from potential to actuality. And that shift never happens without some prior actuality making it possible. And so there must be, for any change to be comprehensible as the change of something into something else, or the change of one property to another, there ultimately has to be a prior actuality that is always actual, right? An eternal first cause. Okay, so I think everybody's kind of heard this Aristotelian shtick before. I think it's informing this argument, but it's not mentioned, so it's really not fair to bring it up. But I just wanted to give you kind of a horizon for understanding, when we get into potency and actuality, these arguments might make a little bit more sense than they do here. So I'm reading this first one as an explication about how one must think about cause if a cause is going to be explanatory. And to use Peter's example with the syllogism, right? If the middle term were an infinite series, there would be no connecting Socrates and mortality, right? And therefore there would be no connection, there would be no explication, because our middle term would be dissolved into innumerable medial things. Sandy? And then Tim.
Yeah, I was gonna just to respond to that. So the middle term, how we understand the middle term is what's going to get us further or keep us behind in terms of understanding what's beyond it. Is that, or what it's composing? Is that kind of that's what I was confused about at the beginning. I was like, what's going on with this middle term, or these medial things? I was like, it seems on the one hand they're just total dead end, but then if you understand it in another way, they are the opposite. They're extremely important, almost containing the entire unity of everything. Right. So basically there's kind of a there's kind of a, it can go one way or another depending on how you approach, I guess. I mean, I'm not saying he's a relativist. Obviously he's not, but there's certain things that, I mean, he's obviously, like you said, we're not going with just the medial series of infinite regress. That's not getting us anywhere. That's explored and then rejected precisely because it's not helping, right, to understand beyond. It's like this loop. So yeah, I mean, I don't 100% get it, but I understand better. And what I was going to ask was, since it's 5, are we going to read further on in this section? Because maybe some of that, I'm just curious how that connects. I mean, I'm not trying to pressure the group, but
that's good. I definitely want to get especially to the boy and man example. So yeah, definitely. I think we've fleshed this out pretty well, and I think people. Okay, but anyway, I want to hear from Tim.
The only thing I have to say really is that I'm not totally sold into the eternal first cause idea. It seems to me like, it's just asserting something because it seems like logic demands it. But, I mean.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you, and that would be bad method. I agree with you on that.
So, but it seems like that's what the logic is right here in this passage. So, and that's not to say that Aristotle might have some real fancy way of coming to that position later, but as it's argued right here, it seems to be exactly that, and it's not adequate to me.
Yeah, Peter?
Is here that's the right passage or not? Because he does argue that at 994b, sorry, 994b7 or so.
Can you read it?
Yeah, it's that short paragraph on page 29 of the read. At the same time, however, it is also impossible that the first cause, since it is eternal, should pass away. For since coming to be is not without a limit in the upward direction, the first thing from whose passing away something came to be must be non-eternal.
Right. So what do you make of that paragraph?
So what he's saying, suppose the first cause was not eternal.
Right.
Then we would have this first cause just sort of hanging out there, and we would say, well, why did it just happen now rather than back then or someone else? There would be no explanation for it. And that's the thing that Aristotle's objecting to, I think.
Ah, okay.
Well, I mean, that's the problem of, if there is an infinite series, then how did we get to here?
Right.
Well, it's sort of the opposite, or the corollary problem of, if there is a first cause, it must be eternal, right? If you're going to start from somewhere, it must have always already been the case X.
Right. So are you saying that it follows from its being first that it's being eternal and not the other way around?
Well, by eternal, I presume we're talking actually temporal here, right?
We're talking temporal?
Temporality, the eternal being temporal.
Well, it just says roll with it. I'm not sure.
Well, I was assuming so. At the same time, however, it is also impossible that the first cause, since it is eternal, should pass away.
Right.
So if it was the first cause, if it has always been, well, supposing you end up with a contradiction if you assume it hasn't always been.
Right.
Because then it's like
eternal. Sorry. I just don't think it means that by eternal, though. I think eternal has the implication, if it's eternal, it will in the future, or it will always be. So eternal is sort of transcends temporality. And
right. I'm doing the first half and the second half.
Okay.
So if it can't have a beginning, and if it can't have a beginning, it also can't have an end. If it can't have a beginning or end, then it's eternal. That was, I think, the structure of the argument.
And it doesn't solve the problem of how do you get like from a non-temporal being to affect a temporal series. So it really is, it's just kind of like a God of the gaps kind of assumption. Not God, but this eternal. I don't know what Aristotle thought of this. He called it divine, whatever. But it's really the same insertion of God that Christians used to do, because it doesn't make sense that there is no beginning, and it doesn't make sense that there is something in space-time that doesn't have a beginning. So there must be something that's totally not an explanation. For which there is no explanation that is the explanation for everything.
But to be fair for Aristotle, he's not inserting a sky god Zeus or anything.
Destroy.
All right. So this is controversial, and we're not going to solve this controversy right now. I mean, I tend to. Sorry, is somebody saying something?
I think someone's talking on the phone and doesn't realize they have a hot mic.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks, Richard. All right, so I think we've explored that one well. I tend to think of it as an internal explication of what a cause would have to be in order to be explanatory, and what it cannot be is unlimited, indefinite, indeterminate. Peter?
No, yeah, I agree. It just that somebody, was it Tim? Somebody brought up the antinomies in Kant earlier.
Right, Tim. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was like, yeah, I guess Aristotle does not entertain the possibility that the totality of an infinite series could be the unconditioned.
Right. That's right. Yeah, I think that's correct. All right, so let's go to the next argument and try to understand this whole child changing into a man example. All right, so to save time, I'll just read this next paragraph. But the series cannot go downward in this way without limit either, namely, with a starting point above, so that from fire comes water, from water earth, and in this way some other kind, genos, of thing is always coming to be. For one thing comes from another in two ways, apart from the one in which from means after, as in the Olympic Games come from the Isthmian. Okay, so one thing comes from another in two ways. Either A, the way in which a man comes from a child by the child's changing, or B, the way in which air comes from fire. Now, a man is said to come from a child in the way that what has come to be comes from what is coming to be, or as the completed thing comes from the thing that is being completed. For there is always an intermediate, so that as between being and not being, there is coming to be. So too, the thing that is coming to be is between the thing that is and the thing that is not. For the person who is learning is coming to be someone with scientific knowledge. And this is what we mean when we say that from someone who is learning comes someone with scientific knowledge. On the other hand, let's actually just, On the other hand, when something comes from another thing in the way that water comes from air, the other thing ceases to be. This is why the former sort, child man, is not reversible, and a child does not come from a man, for it is not what comes to be something that comes to be as a result of coming to be, but what exists after the coming to be is complete. And it is in this way, too, that the day comes from the morning, because it comes after the morning, which is why the morning does not come from the day. so Aristotle. But B, the other sort is reversible. In both, however, it is impossible for them to go on without limit. For in A, the former sort, the intermediates must have an end, and in B, the latter, the change is reversible, since the passing away of either is the coming to be of the other. All right. let's unpack the word salad of the completed thing coming to be from one thing. But first, let me hear from Tim.
Well, I mean, the only thing I really got out that's solid out of this paragraph is the middle term notion, but the whole thing, does he make a very strong point about the reversibility? Because, I mean, it seems to me that, yeah, you can actually unlearn things. You can start to forget. You can get dementia. And then, you know, so the example, in his example, it is reversible. The only thing that may be not reversible is going from a man to a child, but that seems to be bound by temporality rather than by process of change.
Peter, you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I mean, he's in the paragraph, he's making the point that there are at least two kinds of change: reversible changes and irreversible changes. And he doesn't really bring it out in this paragraph, I don't think, very clearly, but an irreversible change is the man going to child, because it's a development of something that has an inner principle, roughly, I think. The child is the immature version of the man. And there's a natural end to being a full human being, and that is to be a fully formed adult rather than a half-formed child. And so there is a end towards which the child is developing. Whereas in the, well, gosh, I can't remember what's the other one?
Water and air?
Oh, water and air, right? So water turns into air.
Water.
The water ceases to be, or air ceases, something turns into something else. It ceases to be the one thing and turns into being the other thing. But that's not an internal principle. That's just an external thing that happens. And you could then swap back to being the other thing. There's no reason why you couldn't flip and flop back and forth. And you could actually have an infinite flipping and flopping back and forth, I think, right? There's no
right. Exactly.
Another way of explaining that is that the account to talk about what is the man and the account of what is the child, the boy, it's the same account. It's synonymous. Whereas the account for water and the account for air, they're two different accounts. And it's just it's a change that is different substantively.
So, okay, I've got a little diagram to help understand this, at least the way I understand it, but I got a couple hands raised. So first we got Richard, and then Amjul.
So like maybe I'm not understanding like the translation of what's said here. Like, so I'm agreeing with Peter in terms of like the reversible, like say, you know, air into water and water into air, like I guess like, you know, the gaseous or, you know, liquid forms of water. And they can kind of go on, you know, for like kind of forever. But then like in the end of this paragraph, in both, however, it is impossible for them to go on without limit. And the A case is, you know, more clear. And then in B, the latter the change is reversible, since the passing away of either is the coming to be of the other. So I guess I'm not understanding what he means then, to say it is impossible for them to go on without limit, I guess, like in this case for the reversible.
Well, there's a final end towards which the child is developing.
No, in the case of the water to air.
Right, and I think it just means that as the air disappears, we have water, and as the water disappears, we have air, and that's not and each one of those is a term of the process. That there's no infinite approximation of it. It's not something that goes on indefinitely. But in the passing away of the one, we have a limit. It is no more.
Okay.
And in that same limit, the other one is.
Okay, I think I'm seeing like that, like that the finite, the finitude of it is we're dealing with a finite quantity, you know, and then once it's a converted, then that's done. Okay. What I think maybe I was confused by that, is that it can also reverse back the other way, but then then we're just counting, then we're gonna start our count again, I guess. So
No, nice way to put it. Yeah, I totally agree. Let me see.
I accidentally lowered Amjal's hand. He's next.
Thanks.
Oh, I don't have that much to add, but I was just thinking a little bit more of separation and cause and effects. So the first one with this, and I think this idea of the man in the boy, that's the effect seems to reside within, but you just don't see this sort of residing in phenomena when it comes to different elements, like for example this water and air.
Right.
They are separate in a way. So if they are to be reversible, it is still one thing. It could be destroyed, but it comes back, so it's still one, transforming one to another. So you can do this back and forth many times. It's not many of them. It's just still one.
Yeah.
So
nice point. Nice point.
To clarify.
Yeah.
Clarify.
Right. And I think it's good. I'm just going to mention people are starting to cotton on to this idea that that to be a thing is to be limited, and there's a limit to what the thing is, and it's by the thing being something determinate. We've already excluded the possibility of an indefinite and innumerable infinite causes because the infinite is the indefinite, and yet we're dealing with something definite. And there's something contradictory about trying to explain the definite through the indefinite. As a theoretical problem, practically, it doesn't matter how many causes they are. We just get the one that gets the effect that we want. Right? So practically, this is not an issue. But he mentioned several times here, we're doing theoretical philosophy. And so we want to understand cause as such and explanation as such, and not what works in this circumstance and what functions in that other circumstance. So, so if we, so thinking of things as limits, and the water is limited in being water, and when it's air, it has lost the limit of water, and it is now something else. Okay, I got a bunch of hands, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but I think that this whole idea of things as limits is starting to percolate up. Garth seems to be first.
I wanted to maybe try to bring this notion of cause maybe a little bit away from looking at it as purely kind of a mechanical event, and think of it more as explanation, aition. And if we think of it this way, I think it's very important that it be sufficient as an explanation. Right? It has to, in some way, explain enough to be an explanation. If there's no standard there, no criterion there, then you can say it's an explanation at all. And if we just look at it in terms of whether it's correct or not, whether this thing actually happens or not, then we're sort of begging the question, because we haven't gotten to the point of offering an explanation. We haven't really said what caused the event, because we've simply posited another event without a cause, and so on and so forth.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, no, exactly. No, I like the idea of always bumping this up to the level of not how does something behave, but what constitutes an understanding of something, what constitutes an explanation of something. If to know something is to know its cause, right, then if the causes are innumerable and indefinite, then the thing itself is indefinite, and we would have no handle on what its particular limited unity is. And so in searching for a cause, it makes no sense to dissolve the thing that we're trying to explain into pure indeterminacy by postulating an infinite or indefinite number of causes. Okay, yeah, thanks for the, so Nick, and then Tim, and then Mike.
Um, so I just wanted to kind of maybe dig a little deeper on this idea on the item B up here in water, and they becoming reversible, and therefore, as Peter was talking about it, could result in an infinite loop.
Mm.
In other words, uh, appearing like there is no end to it, that there is no limit to it. And to some extent, I'm not clear. I think to some extent, in my reading of it, Aristotle allows for this. Um, so the reason being in this paragraph, he says, that's the paragraph uh, on that same page in 994 and like 910 or something like that. And since the forsake of which is an end, in the sort of end that is not for the sake of other things, but rather other things are for its sake, it follows that there is to be a last thing of this sort. The series will not be without a limit. But if there is no such thing, if there is no for the sake of, there will be a, if there's no such thing, no limit, then there will be no for the sake of which. Those who make it unlimited are unwittingly getting rid of the nature of the good, because that is the for the sake of, most normally, of which things are done. And yet no one would try to do something, if anything, if you were not going to come to a limit. Nor would there be any understanding present in beings. For someone who has understanding, at any rate, always does the action he does for the sake of something. And this is a limit, since the end is a limit. So, so this natural loop of, of fire causing water, water causing fire endlessly, from a temporal standpoint, looks like it's limitless because one is causing the other in time.
Mm-hmm.
But for the sake of which, one could also think of it as having a particular reason for being.
Mm-hmm.
That this particular loop is being for the sake of which something is, for some good, for some
Mm.
stasis or some equilibrium of some sort, that being the good of which for the sake of. So in some way, one could read this in two ways. One is that there is such a thing as limitless from the standpoint of for the sake of which, or also read it in another way, that even with this temporal loops, causal loop, there is a for the sake of, which is of a higher thing.
I'm going to let Peter respond to that because it was directed to him. So go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, so I agree basically with, and that was a really interesting passage you read there, Nick. But it covers more than what what your original question covered. But with respect to the infinite versus the finite, or limited and unlimited, the transition from air to water is finite. Transition from water to air is finite.
Mm-hmm.
That they can cycle back and forth is it a different type of relation, right? That's just a temporal thing that can go on infinitely because you're flip-flopping, but the causal chain in each case is finite. It's along basically one step.
Mm-hmm.
Air ceases, water begins, water ceases, air begins, or whatever it is, whatever it is.
But
so there's no internal telos to it.
Just so I don't I take Aristotle to say when he says there's a limit, it's not that a limit in step. Each step could be finite. All steps are finite, but rather that there is no end is the point, right?
Oh, you're right. You're right. There is no telos for air turning to fire. Fire. Yes, you're very good on you for that.
Yeah. Cool.
So the question that I have is, he saying that it's acceptable in the case of a telos? It's okay not to have a telos. That you don't have. It's not necessary to have a no end in the case of goal, or is he always saying you must have a goal, no matter, even if you're seeing this temporal causal thing going on, like in unending, there is a telos still.
If you don't have a telos, then then it's a reversible process roughly, right? Because if there's an end goal, the child developing into the full adult,
Right.
there is no reversing of that from a teleological perspective, right?
Right. All right, tons of hands. Since we got a lot of people who want to say something, let's try to keep the contributions shorter than I usually make mine. So if you can be more disciplined than me, I'd appreciate it. Tim, you're up.
Yeah, I think I can do that easily.
Awesome.
Yeah, I don't see where, I mean, to Garth's point, how an explanation needs to be a real explanation. I don't see what is gained when we say that we can't really get to an explanation if we have an infinite regression, but we can get to an explanation if we have this eternal cause. I mean, the eternal cause itself is unexplained, so it's not an explanation of anything. It's just, one person might prefer an infinite regress. It doesn't explain anything. It doesn't get to a final cause. And an eternal cause doesn't explain anything either, because it itself has no explanation. So you can't explain an infinite series. You can't explain an eternal cause. So I don't see what we get by asserting it.
Unless their first explanation is self-explanatory.
But it's not. How can it be?
It's first.
It can be.
Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah. I guess that is the question. We'd have to find some way for the first explanation to be self-explanatory for the rule to hold.
Right.
In this section, Aristotle keeps talking about the most true.
Right.
You read through the most true through this. That is the primary thing, is the most true thing. And all explanation flows from that roughly.
Okay, next is Mike.
I'm going to ask Peter to repeat his interpretation that you said about 15 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago. I was texting with Tyler and then I wasn't able to fully focus on that, but I do think it's important because I've read this paragraph several times now and I still don't.
The short one? Yeah.
Get it. No, not the short one. The two types of causes, the reversible one and the other one.
So just repeat why one is reversible and one's not. That was really in response to Nick, which was only like 2 minutes ago.
No, you mentioned something else like 15 minutes ago. Oh, you know what? This is recorded. I can just watch it when it's
okay, good, because I don't remember what I said 15 minutes ago. You expect me to remember that far back?
That's it.
A lot of fun under the bridge. Philip, you're up.
Oh wait, before.
Sorry. My bad.
Sorry, Philip. I guess Tyler and I have been discussing for a little bit, and I think so. I guess I just wanted to state we are talking about first causes, right? I guess that's the instinctive reason.
Right.
To always go back to the first causes. But I think like what Aristotle is talking about here also applies to a finite series of causes that don't extend to the first cause, right? So when you say that if you have a first cause and a last cause, and the first cause doesn't have to be the first cause, and then you have a finite number of medial terms, you can still say that that first cause, the non-eternal first cause, still caused the last term in the series. Is that? And
Peter,
I
go
think
ahead.
that, sorry.
No. I think Peter has a response.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like the end of the second paragraph at little alpha 2. But of series that are unlimited in this way, and of what is unlimited generally, all the parts are alike medial things. If you have an infinite series, everything's a middle term. There is no first, there is no last.
Right.
Cause, there's no cause. So everything's the same.
Yeah, exactly. So you get a
Michael, you're muted. You accidentally muted yourself.
Michael?
You're muted.
Thank you. I couldn't find the unmute button. Somebody must have done it for me. Yeah. So the idea is that if our middle term is unlimited, then anything explains anything else. And so then now we don't have any specificity to what is being explained and what is what's doing the explaining, but rather everything's everything, man. I mean, and so so there you have a complete loss of any specificity of the nature of what's being explained and the nature of what's explaining, and our explanations would all reduce to the vacuous. Everything's explained by everything. And that's another way of understanding this whole loss of determinacy thing. Sorry, so I got, does anybody want to respond to, sorry? Peter?
And I'll offer,
Yeah.
I'll offer Tyler, if everyone doesn't mind, a chance to respond to, since I brought his name up, but yeah.
Oh, that's good.
I think I'm satisfied with what Michael said. I think the issue with the infinite series is why a series, again, an account that limits itself to series in terms of time has that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can never be given the infinite series as one slice of. There are many problems with it, but yeah, the one Michael elaborated on there is the important one for why we need something more than temporal series to be adequate to a first cause.
I guess I wasn't bringing temporality into it, but we can chat about this another time, Tyler. But yeah, all good.
All right, thanks, guys. Philip?
Yeah, I'm wondering two things here. How one kind of thing can have any effect at all on another kind of thing. Like, aren't they kinds and aren't they separate? And therefore, how can one kind affect another kind? I don't know, it's just a question in my mind.
Yeah, no, so I think we'd have to look at formal or essential causes for the way in which kinds can be explanatory of one another, right? So when you said you have an effect, it sounded like some kind of temporal event, right? But kinds, genus and species, even though a genus is explanatory of a species, it's not an event in which the genus every once in a while imposes itself on a species, and then that temporal event is over. That's a genus is a great example of an eternal cause. It's one that never stops causing and never started causing, but is explanatory of any species. So we haven't talked about any of these formal ones, but
well, if you have one kind affecting another kind, those two kinds must be in a unity.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there can be no effect.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you might be thinking cause and effect as like still temporally separate here, but
no, he's talking about kinds, not temporal. I mean,
go ahead.
Kind of thought effect of a material object. Yeah, I mean, those are different kinds of things. And
I see. Yeah,
I'm watching the picture frame behind you move, and you're not touching it. So maybe.
And so I got a couple more hands, and I would love to get to this.
Not one. Yeah, second point is really about this
adult boyhood thing before we take off. Yep. Yeah, go ahead, Philip.
If all change is the transition from possibility to actuality, like the child to a man.
Yeah.
Then how does anything external cause a change?
External in what sense?
To the thing itself, because the change is the change from possibility to actuality within the thing itself.
Right.
So does the change, does the immediate, what we call the immediate cause, is that either creating new possibilities for the thing itself? Or is it triggering possibilities that get changed into actuality?
Aristotle says there's two kinds of change here. So they're not all going to be of the internal type.
Right. I don't know if that's very satisfactory, but.
No, but anyway, I'll think about it. Okay.
All right, thanks.
Thanks,
Garth, you're up.
Yeah, I wanted to point out that when Aristotle talks about the unlimited, he's always talking about it as a potential. In order for something to be actual, it must be limited because, actuality is, in a sense, constructed or comes about in a finite way through a series of steps. So, like, for example, there are infinite numbers, but you can't count all infinite numbers, right? You can't find a collection of things that are actually infinite in number. You can only posit these as potentials or possibilities. Like if you talk about, like, say, the density of the real numbers, for example, right? That definition states that you can always find a number between any two numbers, but that doesn't mean that you are actually doing this an infinite number of times. Right. It's describing a potential, and that's the nature of the unlimited. And I think that's why we have to see a limit in a final cause, because that's what is actual, right? Is the what the thing is. Aristotle also, in posterior analytics, doesn't he say that the explanation is what the thing is? Right. So when we are explicating the causes of things, we're also describing the thing itself. Anyway.
That's a good point, and that reinforces this lack of possibility of an infinite number of causes, which would make the thing indefinite, and therefore we wouldn't even know what it is we're trying to explain. Okay, we got tons of hands. Okay, this is awesome. Let's just roll with it. And we're going to get to the child man thing next time. So Tim, you're up.
I just want to, I didn't quite get what Gar just said. I think it was very, very good. It might be addressing my point to a certain extent, but what Tyler said about, and what you said, Michael, about determinacy. Determinacy is necessary in order for anything to be particular, or however. And that's true. So we need particularity in order to be able to give explanations of things, but that doesn't give an explanation of determinacy itself if we require an eternal cause, because there is no determinacy to the eternal cause. So again, I'm still troubled by that whole notion, and I agree that we need determinacy, that we have limits, but we don't have an explanation for those limits, other than sort of we need them in order to explain things, but that need for them is not an eternal cause. So anyway, that's all I had to say.
I see the problem, and we just have to get to the nature of these first causes, whether to see how your objection is met. Amjul.
Well, if you want to talk about this, I don't have to talk about this now. If you're going to do it next time, but this the man and the boy. I thought Philip was trying to get a better understanding of the man and the boy analogy, and the way I see it is, the man is already in the boy in one sense, as kind of an essence in one sense. So just like a tree, oak tree is in the acorn. So there's a development that occurs. Now, how does this come about? You're going to have some external triggers. Just like think of powers. There has to be some sort of trigger mechanism. And that's for the seed, the light, the soil, the water. But you need that seed, of course. But there's these other sorts of triggers, helpers, called auxiliaries. that's going to help to do it.
Right.
So that's binds it, but it is determined in one sense. So that's kind of what I kind of wanted to answer Philip. I think maybe that what Philip was going after. I'm not sure.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, no, that's a super interesting example. We need to look at more because it seems to involve final cause, and that's something we haven't had a chance to talk very much about. Nick, you're up.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of respond to that distinction between actual and potential, and the analogy with the numbers being infinite and not countable from a human standpoint. It's just that I don't think that Aristotle is denying that there could be infinite things in the universe or infinite things in our minds. I think in this particular case, he's only talking about cause, and the idea of infinite series of cause is problematic, going either way, forward or backward. And in the backward case, where if everything needs to go back to a first cause, that first cause cannot be caused by itself. So it has to have been there.
Right.
Regardless of time, it has
Right.
to be timeless. It's the only conclusion one would have.
Right.
Everything had to go back to a first cause. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a first cause.
Right.
Something would have started it. So it's logical, and it's whether that makes real argument for a God or a creator. I mean, Kant addressed that, and other people have talked about cause being something that is within phenomenon. But if you're trying to explain phenomenon itself, or you're trying to explain the universe, then you can't use a causal argument in that case. It's a meta outside of the scope or a characteristic of phenomenon. When you're talking about things like what caused this cup to be made is different from what caused the universe to appear
Right.
in the first place.
Right, and yeah, so I'm just going to add, Aristotle's not interested in why one event happens after another event in some kind of ordered series, but how certain events or how certain motions contribute to the determinate nature of things. And so we're not just, Aristotle's not going to say what caused the cup to fall, but rather, what constitutes a cup, and what makes it distinct from anything else, what makes a fall different from anything else, right? And so in order to get at the determinacy of all these terms that we use for more global explanations, right, we need to get at not the way things appear, but we need to get in some sense at their being, and that being is always determinate. And we need the four causes in order to get at this determinacy. And we need precisely four causes and not an indefinite number of them, because then we lose the determinacy. So Garth and then Mike.
Yeah, I wanted to comment a little bit on what Amjul said just now about the seed. I think that's a good point, and I think it points back to the nature of things. Everything that has a nature has that nature when we assume certain conditions exist for that thing in order for it to express its nature. Otherwise, it won't be the thing that we think it is. And like, I think of these as the ecological conditions of existence, so to speak, because everything that exists in its ecosystem of things around it that allow it to exhibit the nature that we see it having. And if we look at our society in general, we have a habit of, sometimes we think of these conditions as the cause of something. Like if I make a mistake, it's because, somebody bumped into me or something, right? But if somebody else makes a mistake, then we put that on them, right? And say, oh, that guy, he did something bad, basically, right? It shows the superficiality of our reasoning and the way we engage in society. Anyway.
Thanks. Mike?
I guess before our thing is over, I did want to go on a complete tangent, if that's okay.
Sure.
I did want to bring up on page 27 at the bottom. There was that one part that I really found interesting and didn't grok initially, but I guess it brings up again the hierarchy of being, and that I guess what I got from that is things that are more universal have more truth and are thus a higher type of being. I can read it. It's, I guess, the 7th line from the bottom. Now each attribute belongs most of all to something when it is because of it that a synonymous attribute also belongs to other things. For example, fire is the most hot thing since it is the cause of heat and other things. And so what is also most true is what causes all derivative things to be true. That is why the starting points of the eternal beings must be most true.
Right.
I just found that interesting on it and just wanted to bring that up.
So, yeah, so look, any cause that is a first cause of being is at the same time the cause of the truth of that being. And so here we don't have truth put on the propositional or epistemic or subjective side, and then being somehow external to all of that. So what is somehow external to truth, and what's true is somehow unrelated to being. But we have this, to just use an overused term, and this internal relation that he's pointing out here. Does anybody else have anything to add to that particular passage? So
I'm wondering what eternal beings is he referring to?
Well, planets, stars, things that go in circular motions.
First causes.
Huh?
First causes.
And ultimately, what matter and form and final cause and so I mean, these are matter can never pass away. It's eternal. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to account for change. And so matter is one of those eternal beings. Yeah, so there'll be a little bit of a catalog of them.
I mean, okay, so what do we make of that? That almost sounds like it's materialist.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of people have accused him of being atheist and materialist. A lot of, especially Christian theologians have. But he's saying, well, okay, so I don't think he's materialist, but I'm happy to go down that path a little bit later. But I do see Tyler having a hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to mention there is an issue if we don't have eternity in here somewhere, which is that we have an account that says something started from nothing. And so we've already undermined the possibility of giving an account which allows for knowledge of first cause if we do that.
No, that's an interesting point, and we did talk about last term. That the problem of if we don't accept these dependency relations, or if we don't see them as being internal to anything being something, then we've accidentally, without even knowing it, committed ourselves to the idea that things just pop in and pop out of existence, and there is no underlying subjects of change. But if I'm red now and then I'm pale later, it's because my the red Michael disappeared from existence and the pale Michael popped back into existence. And at this point, we've lost any of those middle terms. We've lost all those connections. We've lost any explanatory power to explain anything whatsoever, right? And so Aristotle's always reminding us, if we don't go down this one path, right, that alternative is is complete vacuity, right? And in which place we might as well just assume that Zeus is cavorting with, with some maiden, and that's why it's raining. We might as well just make shit up, right? At that point, we don't want to just make shit up. So yeah, okay, yeah, thanks. That was an awesome point. Let's see, Richard.
So I'm gonna caveat this that like I know can maybe a little bit enough to be dangerous, but like definitely yeah, like my like don't take this with that much authority, but like I'm not trying to like definitively say like materialists or not, but like at least from my understanding from other studies that Aristotle was kind of rejecting, maybe Plato kind of went too far in abstracting kind of like this realm of ideal forms, and that at least like kind of looking at nature was, I'm not someone throw me a line here, but yeah, I mean, I guess okay, like along those lines, yeah. Or what are your response to so far that, I guess, or
I'm not. So you're saying that the rejection of Platonic ideas seems to imply, at least in a very simple universe, that if there's no ideas, then there's nothing but matter.
Like maybe not a rejection of all of Plato, but at least rejection, rejection that like I think Plato's kind of like obsession with the realm of ideal forms maybe was a bit too far. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Let me put it. There's 1,000 years of reading Plato and Aristotle as fundamentally agreeing on all the fundamentals, and since then there's like a 400-year tradition of saying that they disagree on all the fundamentals. So we just have to read them and figure it out ourselves, right? Because you can't. Yeah. So okay. Because that also gets to the point. What are the fundamentals, and when do we agree on the fundamentals but disagree on the consequences? And when has our disagreement bled into the fundamentals so that we're actually talking about two utterly different problems? So, yeah, I like to think of them as it being an internal school squabble and not a radically different philosophy.
That's probably in line with what I've heard so far. Okay.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. Sandy.
I just wanted to say, I think we're kind of getting distracted here by trying to figure out like if Aristotle's a Christian or a materialist, or what about God? I mean, and I know, and I understand, Michael, that you also bring up God sometimes. It's not that God is irrelevant or not. I just, first of all, don't think I'm like way at the beginning. So I'm like, huh? Like, I'm just trying to understand the basic relations before we get to that part. It just kind of overwhelms me a bit when that comes up, but it's about like, oh, is Aristotle a materialist, or is he a Christian or a pantheist or whatever? It kind of seems irrelevant to me. I mean, I get the impression that Aristotle is the most universal thinker I've ever come across. He's really fair when he even talks about, like, and I think in the beginning of the section we read, he mentions why even the people who were wrong are relevant, or why the people who just had superficial ideas actually contributed something because they got the ball rolling. And that's, I mean, I'm just amazed when I read stuff like that, because it's totally different from my personality. I tend to think of the superficial people as being in the way and dangerous and distracting people, right? And he has this amazing view that is really enlightening for me, because it's just totally different from how I think. And so in that sense, I just feel like there's something here for everybody, because that's what he wants to do, is he wants to get down to the most basic universal understanding of knowledge, which should be true for everybody, whether you have a more materialist or pantheist or whatever view of the world, right? So I'm just, I appreciate all of the the tangents and everything, but it is a little overwhelming to someone like me, especially because I haven't read Kant, I didn't read Hume. So just trying to understand the Aristotle is already kind of challenging for me. So for those who want to bring these points up, please keep that in mind, that some of us are like baby steps here. Speaking of the whole child becoming a man thing, some of us are still in the child phase when it comes to Aristotle, and we are getting scared and overwhelmed just like children do when you start talking about things that are way beyond where I'm at in terms of my understanding. It's not supposed to be a criticism. That's supposed to be mean. Just wanted to share that.
No, that's awesome. I mean, it's my experience in the first session is always a little bit more rambunctious, and people have a lot of things in their mind and stuff like that, and they want to bring it in. They see similarities, they see parallels, and they want to introduce thoughts that they think are helpful. And so I think that there's always a little bit of a more random element in the very first meeting of a seminar. So there's that, but totally appreciate it. But Aristotle just doesn't make it easy on anybody.
And can I just point out we're officially in the after party, but we can
right,
continue.
yeah, thank you.
But we'll finish with Greg and.
That's right. So if you take off now, nobody will be insulted. Okay, so.
Well, can we, if we're in the after party, can we just address the point that?
But at least two people are in line ahead of you, Tim.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's totally cool. That's totally cool. So after party, but still a call to order, please.
Gotcha. I didn't see the hand. Sorry about that.
An orderly after
That's
party.
That's what I get for watching the chat.
Okay, yeah. Okay, cool. But okay, so Greg.
On that passage at the bottom of page 27, Aristotle uses the phrase "the starting points of the eternal beings," and the phrase "nor is there any cause of their being." Starting points of eternal beings seems just like it doesn't belong there. I thought that's a cause.
Right. I mean, if you think the starting points that the eternal beings are, as another way to unpack that phrase, then they won't have prior starting points.
If they don't have prior starting points, I mean, that was the other thing on the next page over, 2 pages over on 29, when we were discussing that if it's eternal, it has to have if you have a starting point, it has to be eternal.
Right, can you flesh that out just a little bit?
Yeah, I was gonna say, if it's eternal, it doesn't have a starting point.
No, if a series has a starting point, then that starting point is eternal.
I'm trying to process that.
So suppose you had a series that started somewhere, and suppose this is going to be an argument against and contradiction. Suppose that starting point was not eternal, then that starting point would have just like popped into existence in some sense without any reason. And that seems to be a contradiction in terms. Therefore, since that's a contradictory thought that something would just, why would it pop into existence on Tuesday rather than last Thursday?
That's right. What day did the Big Bang happen?
It was like Monday, I think.
Okay, same problem.
But and what space is there for it to pop into?
That's fine. That's fine. But my point is that just saying an eternal starting point doesn't solve anything. Why would there be an eternal starting point? I mean, that's a perfectly valid why question, as much as why would just something pop into being? Well, why did the eternal starting point pop into being? Or why is it eternal? Or why is it even there?
He's not making that argument. He's saying that if there is a starting point, it must be eternal. He's not yet saying that there is.
It's a hypothetical.
That's a
it's the conclusion. It's the conclusion of the argument, not the premise.
Rashid, do you want to embellish that a little bit?
Well, I was just adding to what Peter was saying. He's not presupposing an eternal starting point. He's saying that an eternal starting point follows from the premises and the conditions that we're evaluating.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, if there's a starting point, then it must be eternal.
Yeah, that's the conclusion of the argument. So if we don't like the conclusion, we have to attack the premises.
Well, it's not an adequate conclusion, it would be my argument. It's just, we have no reason why that is an adequate conclusion.
Well, it does follow from the premises. You might want to reject the premises and say, why does there have to be a starting point at all? But if there's going to be a starting point,
how is any eternal being the explanation for anything temporal?
I don't think he's making that argument.
Anyway, that must be my chip on my shoulder. I can feel it because nobody else gets it. But
no, I get it. I think everybody's questioning whether it's adequate to what Aristotle here is arguing. And there's also this tendency to think of higher order causes, which are all simultaneous, to think of those as if they were horizontal efficient causes, which on one interpretation of the totality of the universe must all be simultaneous. On another interpretation of the universe, right, they're sequential, right? And so, so it's not obvious that all causes have to be sequential. And so what he's doing is showing, if we think about them, all these four different causes as sequential, and think of them as infinite, and what follows from that? So, okay, I'm done talking about that point because I'm starting to repeat myself. So we got Nick and Garth up.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to add to that eternal cause again, but let me do something simpler. I think this statement that I think Tim read about prior to the ones that we were looking at, right, just recently. And so what is also most true is what causes all derivative things to be true. That particular statement, I thought, sounded very right and very logical. It makes sense that, the first things are the truest, so forth. But what I thought was these are the kind of statements that Aristotle makes that sound so right, so true, that stopped science for such a long time, that nobody checked the truth of some of these statements. That when you drop two objects that are of different weights, the heavier one will fall at a faster rate. Nobody checked that until Galileo didn't said, no, that's not true. They both fall at the same rate. So, but it sounded so true. And this is another one of those that, well, the source is the most true and so forth. And but is that really true? I mean, if I were the source of humans, because we can think well, we can think of perfection, must have been something perfect, must have been something greater than us. And that makes so much sense. But when we look at what actually happened, we came from chimpanzees. We came from animals that didn't have sentient thought, didn't have real consciousness or intelligence. Things are getting better. But we can also think of the first things were rather crude and raw. And as time goes on, things get improved and become better and evolve to better things. That could be another truth. But these truths, these statements that are made that sound right and correct, these are the things we've been fighting against. That these were what we were stuck on in the Middle Ages. So one of those is also the eternal things, that there is no, that things must have a first cause, right? That also sounds true. And he says that here. And I do think that unlike Peter saying, I do interpret him as being, as saying that there is a prime mover. I do interpret him as saying that it has to be, if there is a beginning, a first cause, there has to be some kind of God of some sort that did that first cause. I do interpret him as saying that. Maybe, and metaphysics is about stuff like this, right? Metaphysics is not just about physics, physical. It's all about being and so forth. And so it includes the notion of God, any being, God being another being. Anyway.
We're going to have to check that. I mean, Aristotle is definitely not a creationist, so he's not thinking the divine along that that kind of principle, and which would be kind of a God of the gaps thing, or it's just like, oh, we can't imagine what the beginning is, so we'll just put a big guy up there who starts the ball rolling or something like that. That would be horrendous. I mean, that would be a horrendous kind of philosophy and a kind of horrendous kind of explanation, right? So, so hopefully he doesn't do that, right? But but I think that it's good to have these questions in the background when we do read the text and see, whether he does it differently, and if he does it differently, how. I heard somebody talking when I was talking. Does somebody want to get a word in edgewise? If not, then I'll go to the next hand, which is Garth, and then Amjul.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I always end up doing this, but this isn't the original point I was going to make, but I'm going to just add this on at the beginning that a lot of things that are attributed to Aristotle are things that were like, there were like a whole bunch of books included in the Organon that were not actually written by Aristotle, but it took, centuries of scholarship to show that they weren't written by Aristotle. So a lot of the misunderstandings and people claiming Aristotle said this or that come from that, or from later writers who were writing in the Aristotelian tradition. A lot of philosophers, seems to be primarily analytic philosophers, don't really seem to care what Aristotle actually said and just say whatever, and it adds to the confusion. So I haven't seen anything in Aristotle that contradicts modern physics. Even Aristotle's arguments about time have been vindicated by the modern theory of relativity, which is really saying something. Anyway, the point I was going to make was about final causes. It seems to me that cause is not organized temporally, that the final cause should be considered the first cause, and that what something is a cause, but it's not an event. We can't think of it as something that happens in time. Like, something doesn't become what it is often until it's completed. And you can think of that process as leading to the end result, which doesn't happen in terms of time. Like, I don't know, like, here's a weird example from physics that I always think of. Like, how does a particle know how to travel on the path that uses the least energy? Like, Snell's law of refraction says that the light ray will travel the path that takes the least amount of time to reach its destination. What exactly is going on there? The physics explanation is, well, it's a quantum probability, basically. Like, the modern explanation is to use quantum mechanics to explain that and say that this is the most probable result. But, sometimes it, very rarely, once in a billion times, it won't actually travel that path. But because all of our perception is from the aggregation of billions of quantum events, we just perceive it as following the shortest path. But I don't know. I think that the Newtonian model of the universe is not really consistent with the actual physics. in modern times. So anyway, that's all I have to say.
Joel, you're up.
I just a few comments that I want to just Garth, as far as Aristotle's the source of the text, the Galileo versus dropping objects and Aristotle's view of, I don't know if Aristotle actually thought that, so maybe he didn't think that these objects didn't, heavier objects fall faster, so that's questionable, but that's pretty much sure that that was a mistake, whoever said it, whether it be Aristotle or not. So Aristotle's a genius, no doubt, but he's just a man also. But also I want to kind of go with what Tim, I kind of want to have Tim's intuition. I think I a little bit share this idea that was said that if there's a starting point, oh, it's got to be eternal. Why? Oh, because you can't get something from nothing. So maybe that's the idea. But this simple, this white, and then I think Michael kind of jumped in and said, what about kind of the Big Bang? Because the Big Bang is not eternal. It started at a starting point. Now you can argue about the Big Bang. So, oh no, don't think of it like that. There's another Big Bang. Well, that's what we mean. It could be going on and on, big bangs and bangs and bangs and But why would you have to say, oh, it's the first one is eternal? That part, I think Tim, my understanding was that Tim was questioning that, and I share that question. Wait a second, why is this first part eternal? That's just simple. That's how I understand Tim. Tim, maybe I don't know if that's what you're trying to get to, but
yeah,
that's
totally.
how I at least understood Tim.
Absolutely, it is a leap of kind of absurdity or faith or something to say that, oh, we can't have a temporal cause, because then what caused that? So we got this eternal cause. Well, how does eternality even relate to temporality? Why is that a solution to this problem? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I don't think it is. I think that they frequently gets mixed together, but they're not actually part of the same conversation. You're right that you could have causes stretching backwards in time infinitely, but anything contingent that could be otherwise, that remains as it is. Why does it remain in its particular contingent state? Why do the laws of the universe, why are they the laws that they are instead of laws? Not why were they a certain set of laws, 8 billion years ago, but why are they the set of laws that they are right now? And then the next moment. And if there's a reason and an explanation for that, that explanation must be eternal.
I think one way for us to also take note of the term eternal as understood here is that the term is homonymous. There are actually two meanings of eternal. One is time unending. It keeps on going.
Uh-oh. You're breaking up there, Tom.
The other one is timelessness. No time at all.
Yeah, that's true.
But so no time at all is
that's the God of the gaps.
Meaning there's no time.
But I just want to say, since we're not explaining anything, there's no gap. We're still working. Oh, sorry, Tom. Sorry, you're breaking up. I thought you were done. I apologize. And then after Tom, it's Peter.
I didn't actually make my point. I had a point that's unrelated to that.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say to respond to Garth about, he said that he's never read anything in Aristotle that contradicted physics. Well, it just so happens, I think we've got one right in this paragraph we've been dealing with. Fire is the most hot thing, and since it is the cause since it is the cause of heat in other things. I mean, the fire is not the most hot thing. I mean, the most hot thing is when particles are moving their fastest. So heat is energy, and fire is not the hottest form of energy. So there you go. There's just something.
That's
Anyway,
spurious.
that's a minor point.
But what does he mean by fire?
Garth, get in line. Sorry, I've been waiting in line for a while. It's like, yeah, but there's this big confusion between arguing about things that are temporal and then going to this atemporal eternality. I mean, because in a sense, the eternal is not really far back in time. So far back, it's infinitely far back, but it is atemporal. It's outside of time. And so, I mean, all matter banging around into each other is in time and space, right? Fire banging into a pot sitting on it, banging into water. That's all temporal stuff happening in space and time. But necessity and cause and all those things are non-temporal things. Those are at the level of the intelligibles, not at the level of the insensibles or the level of the materiality or anything like that. And so this confusion of trying well, how can the eternal talk about the temporal? Well, it doesn't have to, it's not really explaining the temporal, it's explaining the eternal. All the things that are explained are in the intelligible world, which is essentially in the eternal, I think.
I mean, I'm just going to jump in here because I don't even know how to raise my hand. So if we just take, modern science as an example, right? Particular events are explained by laws, and those laws are not temporal. As a matter of fact, they are eternal laws, or they're at least we attempt to think them as eternal laws, not as themselves an event that needs explanation, but as the explanation. And in thinking the law of the universe, or the laws of the universe, right? We think of the universe as a whole and as an ordered whole, and in order to think of this whole as a lawful whole, right, we need to think of it as as one. Everything is unified by the law. And that's all I think that Aristotle's getting at, is if you're going to have an explanation, you're going to think the whole through a universal, and it's going to be timeless, because otherwise it's just some other thing that needs to be explained. And so even in our modern physics, this, so to speak, this logical order of explanation that Aristotle's setting forth is precisely mirrored. And whether the details of our physics are different than Aristotle's physics, that's what happens when you're an empiricist. You get things wrong, and the next generation cleans things up, and then so the extent to which Aristotle tried to drop things off the Leaning Tower of Pisa, right? He's going to get some things wrong. But the point is he's not interested in omniscience and telling you how everything's going to fall, right? But rather, he's making you aware of the form of thought that you employ all the time in any explanation whatsoever, and making that articulate. And so there's no difference between that form of thought in antiquity than in our modern physics, because they're both explanations. And so they both are expressions of the same standards that he is unpacking, articulating, showing dead ends if you get the standards wrong, showing what that internal understanding of what it is to understand something. That's what I keep harping on. And so since humanity is eternal and one, there's always going to be one standard of explanation, at least if Aristotle's right about the eternity of forms. So I think that the cleavage here between the ancients and the moderns is we're situating the discussion at the wrong level. Okay, I've said enough. Mike and then Tyler.
Yeah, totally. Just carrying on with what you were saying, and Peter, and then just addressing Tim's point about fire being the most hot things, and since it's the cause of heat and other things. I do think, yeah, if we bring our, you know, contemporary 21st century scientific views of things, I guess, yeah, you could discount that because it is not the hottest thing. But I think what he's saying here is not like the temperature or whatever of fire, but it's the fact, you know, back when they were they only knew fire as one of the four elements. And what causes heat comes from fire, so that it has to be the most hot thing because it's the one that imparts heat or fire and other things. I think a similar example would be, you know, like if I jump into the ocean, you know, my clothes won't get wet, right? Or I'm trying to think, like a car can get wet after car wash, but the wettest thing would be water because it's the thing that imparts wetness into other things. I think that might be a way to see it, and that we can always, and again, like we can always bring other examples from our, you know, scientific knowledge from today and disagree with them or discount or find holes in their arguments, but then I think it's missing the points that they are making about.
Can I just address that since it was addressed to me? I wasn't making a comment about Aristotle's point because I can see that's not important. I was addressing Garth's statement that he's never seen anything in Aristotle that contradicted modern physics.
That was a bold statement.
Okay, my bad. Anyway, well, then my comment is to whatever was going on in my head, I guess, at the time. But anyway.
No, but I think it's helpful to.
I agree with what Mike said, though.
Oh, awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, so do I.
I was going to bring up two different, I guess it's a contention between people who argue about evolution. And on the one hand, if survival is an end for living beings, then we have a teleological account where the highest being, right, is not necessarily prior in a series, because the best at surviving, so to speak, is closest to the end, and thus closest to the first cause, which is survival itself. So that's one way to think of it. The other is to think that it's not about survival. We're just describing what happens to persist. The issue with that is that some kind of being, some kind of animal could die out, something else could follow it, that could die out, and some other animal could evolve to become just like the kind of being that died out before it. We have no basis for a hierarchical order on an account of just description of the series.
So what's the kind of the grand takeaway from that?
Well, the takeaway from that is if you're going to relate chimps to human beings, on either account, we really cannot say that chimps are higher in any sense.
Right. I mean, so it's hard to talk about evolution because, but let me see. I think we're getting this whole coming to be, what comes to be is from something else coming to be thing wrong. When we contrast Aristotle with evolutionary theory, and he'd probably think about it in exactly the same way that he gave us in this one paragraph about the boy becoming man. But no, I think your point is well taken, Tyler. But we have to understand. Well, so okay, I'm just going to throw this up here. It's my little diagram. Sorry, I didn't want to do this today, but I'm just going to do it anyway. So what's going on in this diagram, right? The boy becoming the man, I simplified into the act of painting the room. And in order just to make the point of, I paint the room, and painting the room entails certain things that painting the room brings into being my walking to the store, right? And my walking to the store is completed in the act of painting the room. And in the store, I buy the equipment that is completed. But buying the equipment is not a motion that is caused by the prior motion of walking to the store or walking into the store. But it is completed in the act of painting the room, right? And then the further thing is completed, taping floors and sills is completed in the act of painting the room that is still coming to be, right? And so all of these different phases are things coming to be such that something else comes to be. And we can see that this is a teleological sequence in which something more fundamental, painting the room, in coming to be, allows other things that are part of that act to come to be prior to it. And I think this is the model that he's giving us in the organic example of the boy becoming a man. But I think that understanding this, I think that evolutionary theory is not, well, I don't know what I really want to say here, except that I'm not sure that this isn't also explanatory in the same way as the evocation of accidental mutations and then environments and all the rest of it that that gives rise, accidentally gives rise to better conditions for something to thrive, and then that gives accidentally conditions for other things to die, and then I'm not quite sure that just in terms of explanation that the evolutionary model has any advantage over the kind of model that I'm showing here. I'm sure that's very controversial, but I just wanted to put it out there as trying to make Aristotle's point a little bit more tangible. So Nick's been waiting a long time, so I'm going to let him chirp up.
I kind of want to get back to Tim's point about the hang up on the eternal first cause. Now, I just point out that I am also skeptical of the whole thing. Also, I'm not, based on science, blah blah blah. We're modern people now, so. But it's a very if we take a couple of statements as true, as assumptions, the way Aristotle does, I don't see how you can argue against the first cause being eternal. So on A2, the first two statements he makes, or the assumptions he makes, the first one, but that there is some starting point. Let's assume there is some starting point. Mm-hmm. That is, the causes of beings are neither an unlimited series. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm just going to stop there.
Right.
There is a starting point, and the cause of anything is not an infinite regress. Mm-hmm. It has to go back to a starting point. Mm-hmm. Then the claim that starting point has got to be eternal, I think, is still in logic. Because that starting point, if it is not eternal, what came before it? Mm-hmm. How did it come out? How did that starting point get in, if it were? So to conclude that it came about temporarily is a weakness, I think. But okay, it was always there and it caused other things to be, then that is a more logical explanation, I think. It may not be foolproof, but I think it's more believable than the alternative.
Okay, so since that was addressed to me, why is that more logical? Because there is no explanation for that eternal starting point. That's just an assertion. It just like comes out of nowhere just to solve a logical problem. That's all it is. We just insert it to solve that problem, but it itself has its own problem. Where, why do we, when we're looking for an explanation, why do we solve it with something that has no explanation?
Well, I mean, but just to go back to the law, I mean, why do you accept that there are laws that are timeless laws that are explanatory? I mean, isn't that just like some kind of God of the gaps thing? Oh, that they're laws and they're eternal, right? That's completely and utterly absurd, because what caused the laws, right? There must be a cause of the laws, and I just think that just abstracts from the conditions of any possible explanation. If you say, well, there must be laws of the laws, and then the laws of the laws, and we're going to get back into that kind of eternal regress that we were somehow accepting when it came to motor causes, but we immediately recognized the absurdity of when we tried to make the same kind of a statement about formal causes, right? So I mean, it seems like if you're an aficionado of modern physics, then you accept you must accept the idea of a first cause because you accept the idea of laws that are explanatory of particular events.
Wow, that just went like, wait a minute, I've been reading Hegel. I don't presume that there are laws.
Okay.
So
then you're not being, okay. But then at least you must be willing to make the point that modern science is just as crypto-theological as Aristotle, because scientists are out there trying to find laws.
That's a given. I'm not saying that modern science has solved the problem. But yeah, it's equally a bad solution. Materialism is the wrong solution. It's a bad solution to this problem. So is asserting an eternal cause. It's an inadequate solution to the problem.
Well, I mean, laws aren't material. So I mean, I don't think they're necessarily committed to any kind of materialism. If laws are
okay, well then that's a misstatement. Whatever you just said, laws.
Yeah.
Laws as sign of the solution to the problem of physics, that's not adequate as an explanation. Neither is asserting an eternal cause an adequate explanation.
Well, then you're at the point of just embracing things pop into existence and then pop back out.
Well, that's not an adequate solution either. I mean, we can't just accept a solution just because it's the least falsifiable.
That's true. That would be a bad.
So how are we going to? People do in some ways assert something that may be unprovable in order to explain things. So this is, you're right. It is a problem because it is a convenient explanation, but it is an unprovable one. I don't think it's really provable, but it is the same with science. Science in a way has laws. When my reading of science is, science doesn't deal with causality. Science deals with laws, and those laws are predictive. When they're predictive, then we gain acceptance. But if they stop predicting correctly, we throw them away for better things. But it doesn't have to have a first cause. So that part I don't agree with the modern science. Doesn't need a first cause. It just talks about these are the laws. It doesn't try to explain who created what.
Yeah, but that just says, well, we're just not going to explain science. We're just going to accept it. That which is kind of a argumentum ad authority kind of. There's the problem with that. Okay, so I see that. First of all,
Joel has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I just had I wanted to go back to actually your picture, Michael, because I thought it was somewhat helpful. Your picture of the painting, the wall painting. Your picture is now a little bit funny because one can ask this simple question. Look, painting the room can be a cause for Michael to walk to the store, right? In one sense, right? But also, in another sense, walking to the store also helps to paint the room, causes the room to be painted. So if that's the case, then you have this problem of symmetry. What is doing the explaining? what is the explanandum and what is the explanans? It seems like you're switching back and forth. It's possible to go. So when we have an explanation, we have to be careful of the symmetry. It should be asymmetrical, should it not? Or should it be symmetrical? This is a little confusing as far as the, maybe maybe I'm confused or something. But, is there some problem here or maybe that's not a problem?
I personally don't see the problem, but I just might be being obtuse. Peter, go ahead.
I agree with Amjad. Basically, there has to be an asymmetry with explanation.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing can explain the other, but the other thing doesn't explain the thing. Walking to the store does not explain the act of painting. Act of painting, it's not the complete fulfillment, partial fulfillment, explains walking to the store.
Right.
They're of different levels of thing there. And I was going to say something else, but I forgot what it was now. Sorry.
So all the steps leading up to the act are instrumental to the completion of the act, and so the painting of the room comes to be through the coming to be of everything that leads to it, and that's this funky structure that Aristotle's putting his finger on with respect to the boy and the adult, and right. And I just got this example from some modern action theory because I thought it was helpful for understanding what Aristotle's paying attention to when he's talking about this thing. Peter, did you want to follow up on that, or?
I was slow to lower my hand, but it looks like Nick has a hand up.
Oh,
I just wanted to kind of follow up. Isn't that what kind of Aristotle is arguing, though, that to something can be more than one type of cause? One type that you mentioned is teleological.
Right.
There's also possibly formal, possibly material, and then this is the one where things are causing the other efficient.
Right.
So you pointed out efficient cause and teleological cause, and they work together.
Mm-hmm.
And it explains stuff. So I don't think it's a contradiction. It falls into his theory very well, what you just said.
But
Tim.
don't you think, Nick, don't you think there's a little bit of issue of the symmetry? I mean, just think about,
well,
as a scientist, you're trying to figure out what am I trying to explain?
It may not be symmetrical, and it may be there's one that overrides another. Maybe your teleological is stronger than the efficient. But no, I have no problem with symmetry.
I have a great lecture for you to see on YouTube about the difference between infinite and finite causes, and teleological have a different structure than finite causes, and infinite not in Aristotle's sense. So I'll try to post that here because I think it's very pertinent to what you're talking about, and that and I think that explaining human action has this symmetry issue that you're pointing to, and nevertheless, it is precisely the higher order painting of the room, which is both explained by the instrumental causes, and what allows us to understand why they're instrumental causes in the first place. And that's what this thinker calls an infinite explanation, is because it's both-sided that way. So it's an interesting point. I think there might be, okay, I'm done with that.
Is your video suitable for the workplace?
Let me add one thing to what Nick said earlier about there are things that science can't prove. Well, science can't prove a lot of things, but that's not an impediment to science, I don't think, because there are indemonstrable ones, premises, and we have other ways to figure out those indemonstrable premises.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a nice Aristotelian.
Posterior analytics is something we ought to read at some point, because Tom's point is partially covered under that, and it's a really good book.
Maybe we'll make infinite medial things between the metaphysics and deonema, because ultimately we have to read the whole in order to understand the parts, which is infinite explanation, by the way. Sorry, Tim's been incredibly patient. Go ahead.
Well, actually, one thing came up while after the first thing I thought of, but one thing is that I did want to get clarification from you after I make my other point, and that is when we talk about the eternal cause, that's not really one of the four causes, correct? So, and answer this later after I ask my other question, okay, or make my other point. So I just want to make sure that I'm clear that when we're postulating an eternal cause, we're really not talking about one of the four causes, only, except insofar as the four causes are somehow subsumed under the eternal cause. I mean, the eternal cause is the sine qua non, and then the four causes are just kind of the explanatory causes. But anyway, that's a question. And then my point is regarding science, is that science has to have free reign to question everything on its own terms. Otherwise, we say we artificially or arbitrarily cut it short. Yeah. So we could say, we're never going to, as let's say a Hegelian, we're going to say, we can say your science is never going to solve the problem of thinking. But science still has to probe that question on its own terms. Otherwise, we arbitrarily shut it down. So it should go, because that is reason at work, right? It should go as far as it can and ask all the questions that it wants to on its own terms and get as far as it can go, and it will never reach the limit. But then the philosophers are standing by to say, okay, that's good, go for it. But you're actually not solving the problem of thinking. You haven't solved it yet because it's a philosophical question. Anyway, that's my point.
Yeah, I mean, science doing its thing creates lots of practical benefits, whether it is able to explain anything or not. And that's why we love science, not for its great explanations, which it doesn't have any, but for the wonderful practical benefits that we can pragmatically integrate into our lives. So that's my take. Sorry, Tyler.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that there are different senses of science possibly being used here, because Hegel's understanding of science will differ than our understanding of modern science insofar as he speaks of the science of knowing. So not all science is the science of knowing.
Right.
Some is the science of predicting. And all disciplines are human activities that have to do with human ends. And so we have to appeal to ends in some sense to understand the disciplines.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Greg, go ahead. And then
back to whether the eternal cause is one of the four causes. I think it would have to be, not in assuming the answer is yes, but it does exactly what the efficient cause does. It sets things into motion. So I would say yes, the eternal cause is one of the four causes. It's an efficient cause. Now, I don't know if that changes anything about, no, I think it was Tim, cutting Aristotle some slack for the first time.
So does that mean then that the eternal cause is really only another way of expressing the efficient cause, but it's not the other three?
No, it's definitely final cause. It's definitely efficient cause. As the form of truth and being, it's formal cause. I'm not exactly sure what Aristotle says in that chapter anymore, but it sounds like it's pretty much the unity of cause that is then expressed in the four different kinds of cause that we use to explain different kinds of things.
Right, and that's what I was imagining. Like it's somehow God cause that accounts for the other causes or subsumes the other causes, the four causes that are the ones we actually use, because they actually do something, they explain something, whereas the eternal cause doesn't explain anything apart, and you just make it by fiat, this thing that explains the four causes that explain things.
Right. I think of it more like it's not meant to be explanatory. I think the way I'd want to express it is that if we follow through the thought of explanation, what is all the content that is entailed by the thought of explanation, and how far does this thought reach? Is it a thought of totality? Is it not a thought of totality? What kind of unity is assumed in the thought of the explanation itself? Right. So what is it? So what kind of content are we mobilizing in? What kind of world must we think ourselves as being in, if any explanation at all is possible? And that point, it's not, physics explains this, that, and the other events. Metaphysics explains how to think about explanations, right? And what is entailed by explanations. That's what makes it meta. So I see a couple of hands. So Peter, go ahead, and then Amjol.
Maybe I'm just being stupid here, but I was thinking of eternal as a predicate on cause. Wasn't one of the four. I mean, the four causes are the category or the type of the cause or the essence of what it's doing in its explanatory role: efficient, formal, final, material, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that a particular cause, the cue stick hit the billiard ball, maybe that's the first cause of that thing. Well, it's not really. But if a cause was going to be a first cause, then that would promote it to being eternal, regardless of whether it's efficient, final, material, formal, right?
Right.
I don't think there's like, now it does raise an interesting point. Is there ultimately one and only one, the eternal cause? I mean, going back over to Plato and Plotinus, the superordinate good is somehow much higher, and there's only one of those, as it were, and you can't really talk about it. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure that there's. I think you can predicate eternal of a cause without it being the one and only of these eternal causes.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting theory, and it might be right. It's interesting, though, that Aristotle speaks of it as one, and in the context of explaining series.
I missed where he says it's one. That's maybe I just missed that.
Well, I don't know if he used the word one, but he seemed to use it as a singular.
Well, there was the definite article the, but I think that was in the context of the current example we were using.
Yeah, the specific series. Yeah. Amjol?
Oh, well, he just says some starting point. So it may be, I don't know, not even the part, but as far as this the starting this, you could, how do you define eternal? Another simple definition of eternal is that which doesn't change. And that may, I don't think that helps. That may make it worse. But there is also, just to make little things more interesting, since this is after party, so
exactly
like any other after party, it gets worse. So there's also this notion, you got to, something which is everlasting versus something which is eternal.
Mm-hmm.
That's that distinction as well. But that's neither here. I'll just put that aside. I'm still very puzzled about Michael's example, because Michael, don't you feel a little bit like there's a circularity? Like if I ask you, Michael, oh, you're painting your room. You said, yeah. I said, oh, what caused you to paint this room? Oh, I went to the store, the brush, and I got these things. And I said, oh, what caused you to to get the brush and everything and the walking and stuff, and you say painting the room. Now that seems circular, don't you think? I mean, there's one sense you feel like, you haven't answered my, you're begging the question a little bit. I mean, don't you feel like that a little bit? Or maybe you're saying, oh no, you're confused, Amjad, because those are two different kinds of causes. So it's not the same circle. Maybe that's what you want to say, but I don't know if it's a little bit confusing, a little bit to me.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So I'm just spacing out. I'm not quite sure how to answer that, right? Because I would never have said it's the walking to the store that causes the painting of the room, right? But that the painting of the walking to the store is part of the activity of painting to the room, and it needs to be completed in order that the painting of the room continue to come to be. And if I can't make it to the store, there is no coming to be of the painting of the room. And so I was just trying to model that language that Aristotle gives us in the child manhood thing with a different example, right? And so I don't know if that's a response to, but certainly walking to the store is a part of the activity of painting the room, because if I didn't go to the store, I couldn't paint the room. And so painting of the room is what initiates the walking to the store. And the walking to the store must be completed. It can't be one thing continuously coming to be while painting the room is coming to be, because if the instruments for painting the room never come to be, then the room painting never comes to be. So the example still makes complete and total and perfect sense to me, but maybe you can convince me that there's a problem. But Peter first, and then whoever wants to take pot shots at that.
So I'm just going to say Phaedo, because this is getting back to what Plato was asking, or sorry, Socrates was asking in the Phaedo. Was like, he asked Anaxagoras, well, the question is, why is Socrates in jail awaiting death?
Mm-hmm.
And he thinks that Anaxagoras would answer, well, because my sinews pulled this way, my muscles went this way, my bones supported me, and blah, 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 blah. And there's this complicated series of motions. And now here I am inside this location, which we call a jail. That's not the true answer. I mean, that was an unsatisfactory answer for Socrates, because he wanted to say, the reason I'm here is because the citizens of Athens condemned me and I'm a good citizen and blah, 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 or whatever it was.
Right.
That's why he caused his limbs to do all these complicated things, to walk over into the jail cell and eventually drink the hemlock. And I think that's sort of getting back to what Michael's painting example is that painting the room is not, well, my muscle jerked this way and it happened to dip a brush into a paint and then it jerked that way and it slattered it on, in a very precise way on the wall, et cetera, et cetera. So that's not the explanation of painting the room. The painting the room is like, my wife got angry at me and I went and changed the color to pink or whatever it was. I mean, that's an explanation.
Tyler.
Yeah, I just want to quickly add before, if something can just as well be the explanation of the contrary, we have a problem. So that's in play here too. So the explanation given of Socrates sitting in jail that only includes these bodily movements and things could just as well be the kind of explanation you give for someone not being in jail.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it doesn't have the specificity. It's a pseudo explanation because it doesn't have the specificity of what is to be explained, but it explains the contrary just as well as the one thing. So yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up. All right. I think we're petering out. Nothing against Peter.
But
we have 8 weeks every week to dive into these things. So let's not burn out on the first one. Anyway, thank you everybody for, as usual, an awesome and intense conversation. And Yeah, we'll hit a little bit of this little alpha and then get into certain sections of all the problems that Aristotle is going to pose for what he has thus far presented. So the anti-Aristotelians amongst us will love it because it seems like it's absolutely impossible what Aristotle is trying to do. And Aristotle knows it. All right, take care. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.